Sarah Martinez adjusted her gym bag and walked into the military base fitness center. After 20 years of service, she still felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with being on a new assignment. At 42, she looked like any other woman heading to the gym. Average height, shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing civilian workout clothes that hid the incredible strength beneath. The assignment was supposed to be routine. Intelligence had picked up chatter about possible security breaches at this particular base. Someone was selling classified information, and Sarah's job was to go undercover, as a new civilian contractor, to identify the leak. Her cover story was simple. She was Maria Santos, a computer systems analyst hired to update the base's network infrastructure. Sarah had spent months preparing for this role. She'd studied every detail of the base layout, memorized personnel files, and practiced her cover story until it felt natural. What she hadn't expected was how strange it would feel to walk around without her uniform, without the respect and recognition that came with her rank and achievements. As she entered the locker room, Sarah noticed it was busier than usual. Several soldiers were changing after their evening workout, their conversation loud and boisterous. She found an empty locker in the corner and began unpacking her things, keeping her ears open for any useful information, while maintaining her cover as just another civilian employee. The soldiers didn't pay her much attention at first. They were too busy discussing their weekend plans and complaining about their commanding officers. Sarah recognized a few faces from the personnel files she'd studied. Most were junior enlisted men, probably in their early 20s, full of energy and attitude that came with military training but not yet tempered by real experience. She pulled out her workout clothes and started changing, moving with the efficient, economical motions that came from decades of military discipline. Even trying to appear casual, Sarah couldn't completely hide the way she carried herself. The straight posture, the quick, alert eyes, the unconscious way she positioned herself with her back to the wall and a clear view of all exits. One of the soldiers, a stocky man with sergeant stripes, noticed her for the first time. He nudged his buddy and whispered something that made the other man smirk. Sarah pretended not to notice, continuing to organize her belongings while listening carefully to their conversation. "New face around here," the sergeant said, his voice carrying clearly across the locker room. "Haven't seen you before, lady." Sarah looked up with what she hoped was an appropriately nervous smile. "Just started this week," she replied, making her voice slightly higher and more hesitant than her natural tone. "I'm working on the computer systems." The sergeant's expression shifted to something between amusement and condescension. "Computer girl, huh? Well, welcome to the real world. Hope you can handle being around actual soldiers instead of hiding behind a desk all day." His friends chuckled, and Sarah felt a familiar fire start to burn in her chest. 20 years of covert operations, countless missions in hostile territory, more combat experience than these kids would see in their entire careers, and they thought she was just some scared civilian who didn't belong in their world. But she couldn't break character. Not when she was so close to identifying the security leak that had been compromising operations for months. So instead, Sarah ducked her head and mumbled something about just wanting to get some exercise. Exercise. Another soldier, younger with private stripes, laughed out loud. "Lady, this isn't some fancy civilian gym. This is military equipment. You sure you can handle it? Some of these weights might be heavier than your little purse." Sarah bit her tongue and continued changing clothes. She'd bench-pressed more than any of these soldiers weighed, could run farther and faster than they ever would, had survived situations that would break their minds. But Maria Santos, computer analyst, would be intimidated by their posturing. The sergeant stepped closer. His bulk obviously meant to intimidate. "Maybe you should stick to the treadmills. Computer girl. Leave the real training to the real soldiers. We wouldn't want you to get hurt on your first week." Sarah's hands stilled for just a moment on her gym bag. 20 years of training screamed at her to respond, to show these disrespectful kids exactly who they were dealing with. Her muscles tensed automatically, her body preparing for action before her mind reminded her of the mission. She was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, one of the most decorated SEAL operatives in naval history. She'd earned her trident through Hell Week that broke grown men, had led classified missions that saved countless lives, commanded respect from admirals and generals alike. But today, she was Maria Santos. And Maria Santos would be scared. "I'll be careful," she said quietly, hating every word, but knowing the mission came first. The security breach had already cost lives. Her pride was a small price to pay for stopping whoever was selling secrets to enemy forces. The soldiers seemed satisfied with her submission and returned to their conversation, dismissing her as harmless. Sarah finished changing and headed toward the weight room, her mind already working on how to use this encounter to her advantage. Sometimes the best way to gather intelligence was to let people underestimate you. As she walked past them toward the gym floor, Sarah caught a fragment of conversation that made her pulse quicken. One of the soldiers was talking quietly about meeting someone later. Something about the usual payment and keeping things quiet. It might be nothing, but in her experience, fragments like that often led to bigger discoveries. Sarah smiled to herself as she entered the weight room. Let them think she was just another weak civilian. She'd been underestimated before, and it always worked in her favor. The mission was just beginning, and these soldiers had no idea what they were really dealing with. Over the next few days, Sarah settled into her routine as Maria Santos. During the day, she worked diligently at her computer terminal, updating security protocols and mapping network vulnerabilities. Work that actually helped her real mission by giving her access to system logs and user activity. But it was during her evening gym sessions that she gathered the most valuable intelligence. The same group of soldiers frequented the fitness center around the same time each day. Sarah had learned their names and begun to understand their personalities. Sergeant Mike Torres was the loud one, always ready with an inappropriate comment or crude joke. Private Danny Walsh was his eager follower, laughing too loudly at everything Torres said. Corporal Kevin Brooks seemed smarter than the others but went along with their behavior to fit in. Sarah continued to play the role of the intimidated civilian, always yielding equipment when they wanted it, apologizing when she accidentally got in their way, and listening to their conversations while pretending to focus on her workout. It was a delicate balance. She needed to seem invisible enough that they'd speak freely around her, but present enough to actually gather useful information. On Thursday evening, Sarah was using the leg press machine when she overheard Torres talking to someone on his phone. She increased her repetitions, giving herself an excuse to stay longer and listen. "Yeah, tomorrow night works," Torres was saying, his voice low but still audible over the gym noise. "Same place as usual. Just make sure you bring the full payment this time. My guy doesn't like waiting for his money." When I won. Time 7, Sarah's pulse quickened. This was the first concrete evidence of some kind of transaction. She needed more details, but Torres ended the call quickly and rejoined his friends at the bench press station. As the week progressed, Sarah noticed patterns. Torres always took phone calls on Thursday evenings, always spoke quietly about payments and meetings. Walsh seemed nervous around these conversations, constantly looking around as if worried about being overheard. Brooks appeared to know what was happening but stayed carefully distant from the actual discussions. On Friday, Sarah decided to take a calculated risk. She, accidentally, dropped her water bottle near where Torres was talking to Walsh, giving her an excuse to get closer to their conversation. "I don't like this, Mike," Walsh was saying, his voice tight with anxiety. "What if someone finds out? What if they trace it back to us?" "Relax, kid," Torres replied. "Nobody's going to find out. The civilian contractors don't know anything, and our CO is too busy with his own problems to pay attention to what we're doing. Besides, we're not hurting anybody. It's just information." If Sarah's blood ran cold. Information. They were definitely involved in the security breach she'd been sent to investigate. She bent down to retrieve her water bottle, her mind racing with possibilities. Torres and Walsh were clearly part of the operation. But were they the leaders, or just foot soldiers? And what role did Brooks play? That evening, Sarah returned to her temporary quarters and sent an encrypted message to her handler. She outlined what she'd discovered so far and requested permission to escalate her investigation. The response came back within hours. Continue surveillance. Gather more concrete evidence. But maintain cover at all costs. The following Monday, Sarah's careful routine was disrupted. She arrived at the gym to find Torres and his friends in an agitated discussion near the locker room entrance. Their body language was tense, and they kept looking around as if worried about being watched. Sarah changed her plans and decided to use the cardio equipment instead, positioning herself on a treadmill where she could observe their behavior while appearing to focus on her workout. Through the reflection in the mirrored wall, she watched as a man in civilian clothes approached their group. The civilian was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and expensive clothes that marked him as someone with authority and money. He spoke briefly with Torres, and even from a distance, Sarah could see the tension in their interaction. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but when it ended, Torres looked angry, and the civilian looked satisfied. After the civilian left, Torres gathered his friends in a tight huddle. Sarah couldn't hear their conversation over the noise of the treadmill, but their animated gestures and worried expressions told her plenty. Something had changed in their operation, and they were clearly concerned about it. That evening, Sarah lingered in the locker room longer than usual, hoping to overhear more of their discussion. She was rewarded when Walsh and Brooks entered, continuing an argument they'd obviously started elsewhere. "I told you this was a bad idea," Brooks was saying. "Now he's pushing for more sensitive material. What happens when they realize we can't deliver what he's asking for?" "Torres says we don't have a choice," Walsh replied. "The guy has too much on us already. If we try to back out now, we're all going down." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with concern. She was getting closer to understanding their operation. But it was clear these soldiers were in over their heads. They'd started something they couldn't control, and now they were trapped by someone with more power and fewer scruples. As she packed her gym bag, Sarah noticed Torres entering the locker room. His usual swagger was missing, replaced by the careful movements of someone under stress. He went straight to his locker without acknowledging anyone else. His attention focused entirely on checking his phone. When he opened the device, Sarah saw his face change. Whatever message he'd received clearly wasn't good news. Torres cursed under his breath and immediately started dialing a number. "We need to meet tonight," he said when someone answered. "Yeah, I know it's not scheduled, but something's changed. He's asking questions we can't answer." Sarah realized this might be her chance to identify more members of the network. If Torres was meeting with his contacts tonight, she could potentially follow him and gather crucial intelligence about the scope of the operation. As Torres ended his call and headed for the exit, Sarah made a quick decision. She would break her established routine and attempt surveillance. It was risky. If Torres spotted her, it could blow her cover completely, but the potential intelligence gain was worth the risk. She finished packing quickly and followed Torres out of the gym, staying far enough back to avoid detection while keeping him in sight. Her heart rate increased as she prepared to transition from passive observation to active surveillance. After years of covert operations, the familiar thrill of the hunt was taking over, even as her rational mind reminded her to be careful. The mission was entering a new phase, and Sarah could feel that everything was about to change. Sarah followed Torres at a careful distance as he left the base and drove into town. Her rental car was deliberately unremarkable, a gray sedan that blended into traffic perfectly. Years of surveillance training had taught her to vary her distance, use other vehicles as cover, and anticipate her target's movements without being obvious about it. Torres drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that served coffee and pie to truckers and shift workers. Sarah parked across the street and watched as he entered the restaurant. Through the large windows, she could see him take a booth in the back corner, positioning himself with a clear view of the entrance, a precaution that told her he had at least some training in operational security. 20 minutes later, the civilian from the gym arrived. In the diner's fluorescent lighting, Sarah got a better look at him. Mid-50s, confident bearing, expensive watch. Definitely someone with money and authority. He slid into the booth across from Torres, and even from her position across the street, Sarah could see the tension in their body language. She needed to get closer, but the diner's layout made direct observation impossible without exposing herself. Sarah studied the surrounding area and spotted a 24-hour laundromat next door, with windows facing the diner. Perfect. She entered the laundromat, bought a pack of detergent from the vending machine, and started a load of clothes she didn't need to wash. The position gave her a clear view of Torres's table, while providing perfect cover as just another late-night customer. Through the diner windows, Sarah watched the two men in animated discussion. The civilian was clearly in control, gesturing with authority while Torres looked increasingly uncomfortable. At one point, the civilian slid something across the table. An envelope that Torres quickly pocketed. In return, Torres handed over what looked like a USB drive. Sarah's heart raced. She was watching a live intelligence transfer. The exact kind of transaction that had been compromising military operations for months. But she needed more than just visual confirmation. She needed to identify the civilian and understand the scope of what was being sold. The meeting lasted another 15 minutes before both men prepared to leave. Sarah quickly gathered her wet clothes and returned to her car, making a split-second decision to follow the civilian rather than Torres. She already knew where Torres would go, but the civilian was the unknown variable in this equation. The man drove a black BMW to an upscale hotel downtown. Sarah watched him enter the lobby, then waited 10 minutes before following. The hotel was busy enough that she could blend in with other guests while observing the civilian's movements. At the front desk, she overheard him asking about messages for Mr. Richardson in room 1247. Sarah committed the name and room number to memory, then casually walked to the hotel bar where she could observe the elevators without being obvious. Richardson went straight to his room, giving Sarah time to process what she'd learned. He was clearly not a local. The hotel stay suggested he was visiting specifically for these transactions. The expensive clothes and confident demeanor indicated significant resources behind the operation. Sarah returned to her quarters and immediately began researching. Using her security clearance and access to intelligence databases, she ran searches on Richardson and cross-referenced recent hotel registrations with known intelligence threats. What she found made her stomach drop. James Richardson was a known arms dealer with connections to several hostile foreign governments. His presence meant this wasn't just a case of soldiers selling routine classified information for extra money. This was professional espionage with serious national security implications. The next morning, Sarah sent an urgent encrypted report to her handler. The response was immediate. Continue surveillance. Gather more evidence. But request immediate backup. The operation had escalated beyond what one undercover operative could handle safely. At the gym that evening, Sarah noticed significant changes in the soldier's behavior. Torres was on edge, constantly checking his phone and looking around nervously. Walsh appeared even more anxious than usual, while Brooks seemed to be distancing himself from the others. Sarah was on the elliptical machine when she overheard Torres on another phone call that made everything clear. "I don't care what he wants," Torres was saying, his voice strained. "We've already given him everything we can access. If he wants higher-level stuff, he needs to find another source." The response on the other end must have been threatening because Torres's face went pale. "Look, I understand the consequences, but I'm telling you we can't deliver what he's asking for. We don't have access to those systems." Sarah realized the operation was reaching a crisis point. Richardson was pushing for more sensitive intelligence than the soldiers could provide, creating pressure that might cause the whole network to collapse or do something desperate. After Torres ended his call, she watched him approach Walsh and Brooks with obvious urgency. The three men had a heated discussion that ended with Walsh looking terrified and Brooks shaking his head in apparent refusal to participate in whatever Torres was proposing. As Sarah finished her workout, she noticed Torres watching her. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw something that made her blood run cold. Suspicion. Had she been too obvious in her surveillance? Had he noticed her presence at too many of their conversations? She forced herself to maintain her cover, offering the same nervous smile Maria Santos would give, then quickly gathered her things and headed for the locker room. But she could feel Torres's eyes on her back, and her instincts screamed that her cover might be compromised. In the locker room, Sarah moved quickly but not frantically, packing her bag while listening carefully for any indication that Torres or his friends were discussing her. She heard nothing suspicious, but the feeling of being watched persisted. As she prepared to leave, Sarah made a decision that went against her training but felt necessary. She deliberately dropped her membership card near Torres's locker, giving herself an excuse to return later if needed. If her cover was blown, she would need contingency plans. Walking to her car, Sarah felt the familiar heightened awareness that came with potential exposure. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every sound could signal danger. Her years of SEAL training took over, automatically cataloging escape routes and defensive positions while maintaining the appearance of an ordinary civilian heading home from the gym. But as she reached her car, Sarah realized someone was following her. Footsteps echoed behind her in the parking structure, matching her pace too closely to be coincidental. She adjusted her grip on her keys, positioning them as a weapon while appearing to simply search for the right one. The footsteps stopped when she did, confirming her suspicions. Someone was definitely watching her, and her carefully maintained cover, as Maria Santos, computer analyst, was about to face its greatest test. Sarah knew that whatever happened next would determine whether she could complete her mission or would have to abandon months of careful work. But she also knew that 20 years as a Navy SEAL had prepared her for exactly this moment. Sarah reached her car and pretended to fumble with her keys while using the reflection in the window to identify her follower. It was Walsh, the young private who'd seemed increasingly nervous over the past few days. He was trying to stay hidden behind a concrete pillar, but his amateur surveillance skills made him easy to spot. She made a decision. Instead of driving away and confirming his suspicions, Sarah would confront the situation as Maria Santos would, confused and slightly frightened. She turned around and called out to him. "Excuse me? Are you following me?" Walsh stepped out from behind the pillar, his face flushed with embarrassment and nervousness. I wanted to talk to you about something." Sarah adopted Maria's slightly higher voice and uncertain posture. "What about? Did I do something wrong at the gym?" "No, nothing like that," Walsh said, approaching slowly with his hands visible. A gesture that suggested he was more scared than threatening. "It's just, look, you seem like a nice lady, and I think you might be in danger." This wasn't what Sarah had expected. She let confusion show on her face while her mind raced through possibilities. "Danger? What kind of danger?" Walsh looked around the parking garage nervously. "Can we talk somewhere private? This isn't something we should discuss here." Every instinct told Sarah this could be a trap, but Walsh's body language suggested genuine fear rather than aggression. She decided to take a calculated risk. "There's a coffee shop down the street. We could talk there." 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth of an all-night diner, Walsh nursing a cup of coffee with shaking hands while Sarah waited for him to explain. "I think my friends suspect you're not who you say you are," Walsh finally said. "Torres keeps asking questions about you, wanting to know more about your background, your job, why you're really here." Sarah felt her heart rate spike but kept her expression confused. "I don't understand. I'm just here to work on the computer systems. Why would anyone suspect me of anything?" Walsh leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because we're doing something we shouldn't be doing, and Torres is paranoid about anyone who might find out." "What kind of something?" Sarah asked, playing the role of an innocent civilian, stumbling into a dangerous situation. For a long moment, Walsh said nothing, staring into his coffee as if it might provide answers. Finally, he looked up at her with the expression of someone who'd been carrying a terrible secret for too long. "We've been selling information," he said. "Military information. To people we shouldn't be selling it to." Sarah let shock register on her face. "What? That's treason, isn't it?" "It started small," Walsh said, his words coming faster now as if a dam had burst. "Torres said it was just routine stuff. Things that weren't really classified. He needed money for his sister's medical bills, and this guy approached him, offering cash for basic personnel information. But it got bigger," Sarah prompted gently. "Much bigger. The guy kept asking for more sensitive material, and Torres kept saying yes, because he was scared of what would happen if he said no. Now we're in way over our heads. Walsh explained how Richardson had gradually increased his demands, moving from personnel files to operational schedules to classified intelligence about ongoing missions. Each transaction had trapped them deeper in a web they couldn't escape. Brooks wants out, Walsh continued. He's been trying to convince Torres to stop, but Torres says it's too late. Richardson has enough evidence to destroy all our careers and send us to prison if we don't keep cooperating. Sarah processed this information while maintaining her shocked civilian facade. Walsh was clearly looking for a way out, which meant he might be willing to help bring down the operation. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because Torres thinks you're some kind of investigator," Walsh said. "He's convinced you're not really a computer analyst. He wants to do something about it before you can report what you might have seen." The threat was clear, but Sarah needed more specific information. "What kind of something?" Walsh's face went even paler. "He's talking about making you disappear. Making it look like an accident. Richardson told him that loose ends need to be tied up, and Torres thinks you're a loose end." Sarah felt a cold anger building in her chest. These amateurs were planning to hurt an innocent civilian, or at least, someone they believed was an innocent civilian, to protect their criminal operation. "What should I do?" she asked, letting fear creep into her voice. "Leave," Walsh said urgently. "Finish your assignment and get out of here as fast as you can. Don't come back to the gym. Don't hang around the base after work. Just stay away from places where Torres might find you alone." Sarah nodded, pretending to absorb this advice while her mind worked on a different problem. Walsh's warning had given her crucial intelligence about the immediate threat, but it also meant her time for gathering evidence was running out. She needed to move quickly to complete her mission before Torres decided to act on his suspicions. "Will you be okay?" she asked Walsh. "If Torres is willing to hurt me to protect this operation, what happens to you if he finds out you warned me?" Walsh's laugh was bitter and scared. "I don't know. Maybe I should leave too. Maybe I should turn myself in and hope they go easier on me if I cooperate." Sarah saw an opportunity. "What if there was another way? What if you could help stop this without destroying your career?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if someone with authority was already investigating this operation? Someone who could protect you if you helped them gather evidence?" Walsh stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him processing the implications of her words. "You're not really a computer analyst, are you?" Sarah made a decision that would either complete her mission or end it spectacularly. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not." "Then who are you?" "Someone who can help you get out of this mess," Sarah said. "But only if you're willing to trust me and do exactly what I tell you." Walsh looked around the diner nervously, then back at Sarah. She could see him weighing his options, trying to decide if trusting a stranger was better than continuing down the path he'd been on. "What would I have to do?" he finally asked. Sarah leaned forward, her voice taking on the authoritative tone of Lieutenant Commander Martinez for the first time since she'd arrived at the base. "Help me gather enough evidence to bring down Richardson and save your friends before they do something that gets them all killed." The conversation that followed would determine whether Sarah could complete her mission peacefully or whether she'd have to abandon her cover and handle the situation through more direct means. Either way, the game was about to change dramatically. The next morning, Sarah met Walsh in a secure location, a maintenance room in the base's administrative building that she'd scouted earlier. Walsh looked like he hadn't slept, his hands shaking as he handed her a USB drive. "This contains copies of everything Torres has been giving Richardson," Walsh said. "Financial records, communication logs, even some of the classified files. I managed to copy it all while Torres was sleeping." Sarah plugged the drive into a secure laptop and quickly scanned its contents. What she saw made her realize the scope of the operation was even larger than she'd suspected. Richardson wasn't just buying information. He was systematically mapping the base's security protocols, personnel rotations, and operational procedures. "This is enough to compromise the entire installation," Sarah said grimly. "How long has this been going on?" Quote, "About 8 months, Walsh replied. "Torres says Richardson has similar operations running on at least 3 other bases. He's building some kind of comprehensive intelligence picture. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just about stopping one small group of soldiers selling secrets for money. Richardson was conducting a sophisticated intelligence operation that could threaten multiple military installations and ongoing operations worldwide. "We need to move fast," she told Walsh. "Richardson is meeting Torres again tonight, isn't he?" Walsh nodded. "Same place as before. But Torres is getting desperate. He told Brooks and me that Richardson is demanding access to the base commander's personal files, information about his family, his schedule, his security protocols. That sounds like targeting for assassination or kidnapping," Sarah said, her voice hard. "Richardson isn't just gathering intelligence anymore. He's planning something active." She made a decision that would accelerate the timeline significantly. "I'm going to need your help tonight. Are you willing to wear a wire and record Richardson's conversation with Torres?" Walsh went pale. "If they find out, they'll kill me. If we don't stop this tonight, Richardson might kill a lot more people than just you," Sarah replied. "But I promise you won't be alone. I'll be watching. And I have backup coming." That wasn't entirely true. Her backup was still hours away, but Walsh needed reassurance to go through with the plan. They spent the afternoon preparing. Sarah gave Walsh a tiny recording device and coached him on how to position himself to capture clear audio without being obvious about it. The plan was simple. Walsh would arrive at the diner early and take a table near Torres and Richardson, pretending to be there for a casual meal while recording their conversation. As evening approached, Sarah positioned herself in the laundromat again, but this time she wasn't alone. Her backup had finally arrived. 2 agents from Naval Criminal Investigative Service who would help ensure Walsh's safety and arrest Richardson when they had enough evidence. Through her earpiece, Sarah heard Walsh enter the diner and order coffee. His voice was nervous but controlled as he confirmed his position and activated the recording device. Torres arrived exactly on time, followed 10 minutes later by Richardson. Sarah watched through the diner windows as they took their usual booth, but something was different tonight. Richardson seemed agitated, and Torres looked more frightened than she'd ever seen him. "The recording is coming through clearly." Agent Martinez's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece. "We're getting everything." What they heard made Sarah's blood run cold. Richardson wasn't just escalating his intelligence requests. He was planning to kidnap the base commander's daughter as leverage to force access to classified nuclear submarine deployment schedules. "The girl goes to college in town," Richardson was saying. "Easy target. Lives alone in an off-campus apartment. We take her, make demands, get what we need, then disappear." "I can't be part of kidnapping," Torres protested, his voice cracking with stress. "Selling information is one thing. But this, you're already part of it," Richardson said coldly. "You think you can just walk away now? I have enough evidence to put you in military prison for the rest of your life. You'll do what I tell you, when I tell you, or you'll face the consequences." Sarah heard Walsh's sharp intake of breath through the recording device. This was far beyond what any of them had expected when they started selling routine personnel information. "When?" Torres asked, his voice barely audible. "Tomorrow night," Richardson replied. "I have buyers waiting for those submarine schedules. The longer we wait, the less valuable the intelligence becomes." Sarah activated her radio. "Did you get all that? We have him on conspiracy to kidnap and espionage charges." "Confirmed," Agent Martinez replied. "Moving to arrest positions now." But as the NCIS agents began to close in on the diner, everything went wrong. Richardson must have spotted something because he suddenly stood up and headed for the back exit. Torres, panicking, knocked over his coffee and started shouting about being set up. Through the diner windows, Sarah saw Walsh trying to blend into the chaos, but Richardson had spotted him and was moving in his direction with obvious hostile intent. Sarah abandoned her position and sprinted toward the diner. 20 years of SEAL training took over as she assessed the tactical situation. Richardson was armed. She could see the bulge of a concealed weapon under his jacket. Walsh was trapped between Richardson and the wall. The NCIS agents were still 30 seconds away. She burst through the diner's front entrance just as Richardson grabbed Walsh by the collar and pressed a gun against his ribs. "Everyone stay back," Richardson shouted. "The kid comes with me, or he dies right here." The few other customers in the diner screamed and dove under tables. Sarah found herself in the middle of a hostage situation, with an armed foreign agent and no backup within immediate reach. For the first time since arriving at the base, Sarah dropped her Maria Santos persona completely. Her posture straightened. Her movements became fluid and controlled, and her voice carried the unmistakable authority of a naval officer. "Let him go, Richardson," she said calmly. "You're surrounded, and this isn't going to end well for you." Richardson's eyes widened as he took in her transformation. "You're not a computer analyst." "No," Sarah replied, moving slowly to a better tactical position. "I'm not." "Then who the hell are you?" Sarah's smile was cold and dangerous. "I'm someone you really shouldn't have threatened." What happened next would determine whether Walsh survived the encounter and whether Richardson's intelligence network could be completely dismantled. But for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt like herself again. Not Maria Santos, the nervous civilian, but Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez. And she was ready to end this operation once and for all. Richardson tightened his grip on Walsh, using the young soldier as a human shield, while backing toward the diner's rear exit. "Stay where you are, lady. I don't know who you think you are, but I've got nothing to lose here." Sarah kept her movements slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving Richardson's gun hand. 20 years of combat experience had taught her to read body language and anticipate an opponent's actions. Richardson was desperate, but he wasn't completely out of control yet. That gave her options. "You're right about having nothing to lose," Sarah said conversationally, taking a small step to her left. "The NCIS agents outside have enough evidence to put you away for life. But if you hurt that kid, you'll be looking at a death sentence." "NCIS?" Richardson's voice cracked slightly. "Who are you?" "Wad Klein. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the steel authority of 2 decades in special operations. "And you've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Richardson's face went pale as the implications hit him. He'd been outmaneuvered by one of the most elite operators in the military, and his entire operation was crumbling around him. "That's impossible," he stammered. "You're just a computer analyst. I've seen you in the gym, scared of a few soldiers." "That's called acting," Sarah said, continuing her subtle movement to flank his position. "Something you learn when you spend years operating behind enemy lines." Walsh, despite his terror, seemed to understand what Sarah was trying to do. He made himself as small as possible, while keeping his weight centered, ready to drop or move, if given the opportunity. Richardson's gun hand was starting to shake. "I'll kill him. I swear I'll kill him if you come any closer." "No, you won't," Sarah said with complete confidence. "Because you're a businessman, not a killer. You got into this for money, not murder. And right now, killing a United States soldier in front of a Navy SEAL is the worst possible business decision you could make." Through the diner's front windows, Sarah could see the NCIS agents taking positions. They had the building surrounded, but they couldn't risk a direct assault while Richardson held Walsh hostage. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah continued, her voice calm and reasonable. "You're going to let Walsh go. Put down your weapon and surrender peacefully. In exchange, I'll recommend that prosecutors consider your cooperation in rolling up your network. And if I don't," Sarah's smile was predatory, "then you'll find out why the Navy spends 2 years training SEAL operatives before letting them loose on people like you." Richardson's resolve was cracking. Sarah could see it in his posture, hear it in his breathing. He was realizing that his situation was hopeless and looking for a way out that didn't end with him dead or in a maximum security prison. "I want immunity," he said desperately. "Full immunity in exchange for information about my network." "That's not my decision to make," Sarah replied. "But I can guarantee you'll live long enough to negotiate if you surrender now." For a moment, the diner was completely silent, except for the sound of Richardson's labored breathing. Sarah could feel the tension building toward a breaking point. Either Richardson would surrender, or she'd have to take more direct action to save Walsh's life. Then Torres, who had been frozen in terror since Richardson drew his gun, made a sudden movement toward the back exit. Richardson's attention flickered toward the fleeing soldier for just a split second. That was all the opening Sarah needed. She moved with the fluid speed of someone who had spent decades training for exactly this moment. 2 quick steps brought her within striking distance, and her hand closed on Richardson's wrist with crushing force. His gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as she twisted his arm behind his back and drove him to the ground. Walsh rolled away from the struggle and scrambled toward safety while Sarah efficiently disarmed and restrained Richardson. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds from start to finish. "Suspect secured," Sarah announced as the NCIS agents burst through both entrances. "1 weapon discharged, no injuries." As the agents took Richardson into custody, Sarah helped Walsh to his feet. The young soldier was shaking but unharmed, staring at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You're really a Navy SEAL?" he asked. 20 years, Sarah confirmed, her tone gentle now that the immediate threat was over. "And you did good work tonight, soldier. That recording you made is going to help us shut down Richardson's entire network." Over the following days, the investigation expanded rapidly. Richardson, facing multiple federal charges, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His information led to arrests at 4 other military installations and the dismantling of a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation. Torres and Brooks were court-martialed but received lighter sentences due to their cooperation and Walsh's testimony about their reluctance to participate in the more serious crimes. Walsh himself was reprimanded but allowed to remain in the military after completing additional training and counseling. A week later, Sarah stood in the base commander's office, back in her naval uniform, receiving commendations for the successful completion of her mission. The experience of being underestimated, of having soldiers treat her as if she didn't belong in their world, had stung more than she'd expected. But it had also reminded her why her work mattered. "Outstanding work, Commander," the base commander said as he handed her the official report. "Your operation prevented what could have been a catastrophic intelligence breach." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "Though I have to admit, there were moments when maintaining my cover was more challenging than I expected." The commander smiled. "I imagine those soldiers learned a valuable lesson about not judging people by appearances." Sarah thought about Torres, Walsh, and Brooks, about how their assumptions had nearly gotten them all killed, and about how her own willingness to be underestimated had ultimately saved their lives. "Yes, sir," she said. "I think they did." As she left the commander's office, Sarah reflected on the mission and its outcomes. She had successfully infiltrated a dangerous espionage network, protected national security, and saved the lives of soldiers who had been manipulated into committing crimes they never fully understood. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven once again that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones you never see coming. The soldiers who had dismissed her as just another scared civilian had learned that lesson the hard way. Sarah Martinez smiled as she walked toward her car, already thinking about her next assignment. After 20 years as a Navy SEAL, she was still finding new ways to serve her country and protect the people who needed it most. And if that meant letting people underestimate her again, well, she was perfectly fine with that. Sometimes the best weapon an operative could have was the enemy's assumption that they weren't dangerous at all.